This is Edge of the Box, a podcast brought to you by WhoScored.com.
Hello and welcome to Edge of the Box, a podcast from WhoScored. I'm Dan Bardell, as ever, joined by Stato Martin Laurence and my fellow football connoisseur, Jonathan Wilson. There's been a feast of Premier League football recently, but there's only one game this weekend for us to preview, albeit a very, very important one. So my first question to you, Martin, is you set the running order. You sometimes remember to send it to me. You sometimes don't. Are we devaluing the FA Cup a little bit by not doing a full preview? I feel like we're not taking the FA Cup seriously.
Yeah, no, I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Maybe that's just me not taking it seriously. I wouldn't say that's who scored. We've got full coverage of the FA Cup, by the way.
There we go.
But yeah, just the game. Obviously, there's Man United Liverpool, which is the big game and difficult to avoid, and we won't avoid it. But beyond that, certainly my expertise as well would be sort of put to the test.
Well, the problem is that you have no idea what clubs are going to put out.
That's
so
true.
You can look at the matchup and you can say, oh, you know, the right side of Team X is going to really trouble the left side of Team Y, and then it's 4 different players playing. So at this stage,
that's actually my answer.
Yeah. FA Cup previews tend to be much more about sort of the human stories, the people. And you know, Crawley and their players and Chorley and their players and that's great. It's very hard to do in a podcast like this where you have a stats geek and a tactics nerd.
They tell you what, Jonathan just bails you out there.
Where we just don't care about humans.
Yeah, exactly. We haven't seen any humans for years. So
give me data.
Well, let's move into our comfort zone. There has been some Premier League games in this midweek section, so we'll come to you first, Martin. What's your favourite stat from the midweek matches? Your takeaway?
I think it's more just Leicester's sort of record against what you would consider the big six, and I think we now have to sort of start thinking the big six, does it really exist? No, it probably doesn't. It's quite an annoying sort of phrase. Leicester would definitely consider themselves among the big six. I think if you look at their record now, since Rodgers came in, I know the sort of stat is out there that now they are actually clear that sort of third behind Liverpool and Man City in terms of points since Rodgers took over. And in each of those seasons, obviously half a season in 2 of them, but in each of those seasons they've got more points than Arsenal and Tottenham under Rodgers. So they're just and his ability to manage in these games. He just sort of I don't know. It's a difficult one with Rodgers because you don't know if he is getting the credit he deserves. He probably is, but there's still this sort of sense about him that people find him a bit David Brentish, slightly annoying, and he will always be held back by that a little bit. But the job he's doing is outstanding. Obviously, the way that they're playing in these games as well deserves a great deal of credit. Because I think if you look at the stats on paper from the game against Chelsea, it looks like an even game that Chelsea probably edged in terms of their dominance of the ball. I think Leicester only had 35.6% possession and only had 8 shots. But if you watch the game, they were so comfortable, so clearly the better side, so clearly the better set up side. And that's been similar case in the games that they've played elsewhere as well. In terms of they've had less possession against Arsenal, Man City, won those games, so they've got 13 points now against the big six. Like I said, 13 out of 18. So that record in those games is brilliant, and they're only averaging under 10 shots in those games. So just clinical, creating good chances, which is the difference. I think we saw from the Liverpool Man United game at the weekend that Liverpool had 17 shots, I think, but it was difficult to sort of remember them. And United only had 8, but obviously had the better chances towards the end of the game. So the quality of the chances is all important. And they're just set up to play sort of counter-attacking football, and all the players clearly like playing for Brendan Rodgers. They're all buying into it. So Leicester's just strengthening their case, not just for a European finish again, but for a top 4 finish, which I think we'll come on to later, but they look a great bet for that, in my opinion.
Yeah, and the thing that struck me from the midweek game is that everything they do when they come forward is with real purpose. When they come forward, I thought they were an excellent watch. Jonathan, what was your takeaway?
Yeah, I mean, sort of the flip side of that, it's Chelsea. I guess it touches on this idea of a big six. That, I think we have to be clear when we talk about big six. We're talking about in economic terms. So the clubs who have the stadiums and the economic infrastructure to give them an advantage over the rest. Now, Leicester sort of have associate membership of that because they've been so consistently good over the past 5 years. But the stadium is half the size of Tottenham Stadium. I mean, of course, there is a sort of an additional weirdness this season with no fans. That Tottenham, I mean, it's one of the great ironies of modern football that Tottenham have one of the most famously sort of financially cautious boards and chairman in Daniel Levy, and he just gone and spent £1 billion on this completely pointless stadium. That if fans don't come back for several years, what a terrible decision that's going to turn out to have been through no fault of their own. So Manchester United's record, I mean, this I guess goes back to Sunday. They haven't beaten any of that big six plus Leicester, so, big seven. So the teams who you expect, and I realise I'm talking to Villa fans here, but the teams you realistically expect to occupy the top 7 place at the end of the season, they haven't beaten any of them. And Chelsea's record against that big seven is equally awful. And that run of 17 unbeaten games just looks increasingly misleading now, that it was against either weaker sides or sides who are happy to play out a 0-0 draw. And I think what's really, really worrying for Chelsea, well, there's 2 things, but the tactical thing is it's the same goals they concede over and over again. So even James Maddison afterwards saying, we know they switch off at set pieces. Leicester hadn't scored from a corner all season.
Really?
Yet they score. I mean, okay, it's a short corner, but still a corner. They know that Chelsea don't defend that well. And then the second goal, just such a simple ball over the top, and the defence disintegrates. And that, I think, is the second point. And it's really to do with Lampard and the way, afterwards, yet again, as he's done consistently in this bad run the last month or so, apart from the Manchester City game, when it was almost like he was making a conscious effort not to do this. And that game, City played so well, there was an obvious excuse of, what can you do? They're brilliant. But the whole thing is about, the players' mentality is not right, they're not running enough. And you think, well, okay, very simple thing. Why do you pick Rudiger, not Zuma? Zuma was doing really well. That Zuma-Thiago Silva partnership seemed to be working. Why have you brought back Rudiger, who I'm not even sure was, 5th choice at the start of the season? And suddenly he's back in. And it's the second goal is a mistake by him plus a mistake by Reece James. And then you start to think, well, we all talked about Kepa and his dreadful form. And we're sort of, you got to give Lampard a bit of a pass because Kepa is sort of disintegrated as a goalkeeper. His confidence has totally disappeared. And you also say, Kante is having his worst ever season in English football. So Lampard's a bit unlucky there. Well, hang on. Maybe it's not bad luck. Maybe Lampard is really bad when players start to dip at picking him up again. And you've seen Marcus Alonso's form disappear. David Luiz's form disappear. Timo Werner's form disappear. Kai Havertz's form disappear. There's not a single player, with the possible exception of Mason Mount, who you can say is playing better for Chelsea now than they were 18 months ago. And that's a huge concern.
Yeah, it really is. I will say as well on the Kepa front, Mendy suddenly looks a little bit shaky to me as well. So there's definitely something going on. There's something deeper with the problems that are going on at Chelsea. My takeaway was going to be that James Justin is just absolutely incredible. Whether he plays right back or left back, he's just a real good player, in my opinion. But then, obviously, I watched the Villa game last night, and there was a bit of a controversial incident, should we say. I'll come to you first, Jonathan, as the neutral in this conversation. Please tell me you thought that offside was an absolute farce. Well,
the first thing I should say is I don't understand modern laws of football at all. But if that is the law, then the law is ludicrous.
Yeah.
Because what I don't understand with we tie ourselves in this sophistry, these knots we tie ourselves in of but when Tyrone Mings plays the ball, that's a new phase of play beginning. Yes, but the offside was in the previous phase. So to give you offside then. the demonstrably Rodri is gaining advantage because he's conditioning how Mings plays the ball. He's conditioning the amount of time Mings has on the ball. So as the ball's knocked forward, fine. If Rodri just sort of steps back and doesn't approach Mings, just carry on playing. There's no need to stop it. But as soon as he begins to get close to Mings, it's offside, and it's it was a really, really good game. I thought City were excellent. I thought Villa were excellent, and it's just a real shame that a stupid decision like that is the thing that ends up deciding it.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, Martin, I imagine you're as absolutely frustrated as I am. Have you got any takeaways from that decision?
Yeah, it's around the laws, around the rules. I think if I'm going to be that guy who actually reads out the rules, but if you actually go on the FA's page, there's 3 clear rules for an offside offence that just make sense and all apply to that situation. So challenging an opponent for the ball, coming back from an offside position, you're offside. Clearly attempting to play a ball which is close when this action impacts an opponent, which is kind of what Jonathan was saying. It clearly affects Tyrone Mings' ability to play the ball. Making an obvious action which clearly impacts on the ability of the opponent to play the ball, all perfectly in place there, all apparently offside. And then the FA just decide to put in this ridiculous subplot, this ridiculous subtext. Let's make the rule more ambiguous so that we can just sort of wriggle our way out of terrible decisions. This is like, a deliberate play of the ball. Even the wording, a deliberate play of the ball. What's a play of the ball? Is that a touch? A deliberate play, like why is it so sort of vague? And yeah, he's just clearly affected. And how that deliberate play of the ball suddenly means he doesn't have an advantage. How's he not got an advantage? He's literally tackled.
There clearly is a case that had Mings taken the ball down, controlled it, turned around, and then knocked it back, we wouldn't have a problem with that being offside.
Yeah,
because that is a new phase of play. But I don't see how you can say the new phase has begun because he never fully had the ball under control. His first touch is slightly poor, which is what allows Rodri to nip in. Yeah. So that phase has not begun.
I think that's the point where it's a chest trap and the ball has to fall to his feet. By the time it's actually come down to his feet, Rodri's on him. He's upon him basically. So he might not be in his sort of immediate vicinity when he first touches the ball, but you have to apply logic to the situation. Like he's decided to chest the ball. Okay, maybe he should have cleared it. Should be irrelevant, really. Like, let's just look at it based on what's happened, based on logic, common sense. He's interfering with play as soon as he comes into sort of Tyrone Mings' immediate vicinity. And I was keen to say last night, I thought Man City deserved to win the game. I thought they were sensational. On another day, the little breaks, there was a sort of 5-minute spell. Even Villa had a couple, but there was a 5-minute spell. It's just like, how has that not gone in? How are they not scored? They could have scored 3 or 4, and you couldn't really have complained. And at the same time, Villa played really well. But we don't know what would have happened had that goal not gone in. And that sort of takes me to our next point, because people will say, oh, well, they won 2-0 anyway, they got the penalty. And this brings me to my next point that just rankles me, so I'm going to rant about it for a little bit, where any sort of Villa fan who complains about a decision gets an image of Willian Nyland dropping the ball over the line and saying, oh, you're only in the Premier League because of this. And the logic is just the most immature thing I've ever seen, in that goals apparently don't affect games or the rest of the season. Of course, the Sheffield United game would have panned out exactly as it did if that goal had gone in. It's ridiculous. And yeah, to me, it's sort of up there with the sort of infancy of thinking, oh, Villa beat Liverpool 7-2 and Liverpool beat Palace 7-0, so Villa will beat Palace 14-2. It's this ridiculous logic that somehow football and life isn't affected by events that happen. So yeah, we don't know how that game would have panned out. I do think personally City deserved to win the game. So I didn't really have too much of an issue with the result. But like I said, like Jonathan said, it was just a real shame that it had to be decided in that way, because it was an excellent spectacle. Both teams playing really well, both teams going for it. And it did seem, to be fair, like a game that City needed something to go their way, because it hadn't to that point. They hadn't got little breaks in front of goal, and they needed maybe a moment of controversy to win it. And that's what happened.
Yeah, we'll say on the Rodri incident as well. He obviously starts sprinting as soon as Mings takes his first touch. So he's got the momentum as well. So it gives him a real advantage over Mings. I mean, I think we can all agree That's an absolute disgrace, and the game should be replayed. Let's talk about Villa. Let's talk about Villa's weekend game. The only Premier League action that there is this weekend. Saturday, 8 p.m. kickoff. Villa take on Steve Bruce's beleaguered Newcastle side. And Jonathan, if Villa manage to win, which obviously we all hope they do, will that be the end for Steve Bruce?
Well, hang on. Let me distance myself from that.
Well, because you're a Sunderland fan.
Yes, but I'm not one of these weird bitter Sunderland fans who wants to see Newcastle suffer. What I want is for us never to have to play them again, because it's just too stressful and too pressured. And of the last 8 times we've played them, we've won 7 and drawn 1, and that's fine. And also, it's funny seeing Steve, with Sunderland fans out on. It's funny seeing Steve Bruce in charge and Newcastle fans going berserk about it. That entertains me a lot. But look, I mean, he's clearly coming under a lot of pressure. They've taken 2 points in the last 9 games. Oh, sorry, they've drawn 2 and lost 7 of the last 9 games in all competitions. They've only scored 2 goals in that time. They're playing dreadfully. They do have players back, although not Saint-Maximin, and Fraser's still suspended. But it feels like it's got to that stage, and you'll remember this from Bruce's time at Villa, as I remember from Bruce's time at Sunderland, where it's getting towards the end, and the plan he appeared to have, he starts insisting was never his plan. That was imposed on him by other people, and now he has a new plan, and he tries that, and they still lose 3-0, and then he tries another plan, and it's just sort of spinning a tactical tombola and seeing what comes out.
Yeah, he did exactly the same at Villa. I mean, he didn't end up getting the sack, but in his first full season in the Championship, he was under pressure, and he started saying, I've not been doing things my way. I'm going to play 4-4-2 now. And we did have a mini revival, and we did have a decent season, albeit we didn't go up. But you're right, he does it at every club he's been at. Martin, do you think he will get the sack though? Because Mike Ashley, I think as long as they don't fall into the bottom 3, which I actually don't think they will, you kind of get the impression Bruce will be all right for the season.
Yeah, well, that situation clearly impacts it. If you look at the results, like Jonathan just said, if they were to lose against Villa or to draw, that would be 10 games without a win. It would be eight defeats and two draws in 10 games, and that's certainly living a charmed life, isn't it? If you look back at the teams he's been sort of sacked from or resigned from due to poor results, his last 10 at Villa, 1 win, 6 draws, 3 defeats. Last 10 at Sunderland, 2 wins, 3 draws, 5 defeats. Last 10 at Birmingham, 2 wins, 1 draw, 7 defeats. So his run now is worse than all of those points. So I think if the ownership had changed and that had sort of all gone through, there's zero chance that he'd be there right now. So yeah, I think Mike Ashley's situation and his apparent position of being willing to sell the club, which is another sort of talking point altogether, is clearly keeping Steve Bruce in a job at the moment.
But I mean, you say that you don't think they'll get sucked into the relegation picture. They're only 7 points above, and Fulham are playing better and better and better. I mean, Fulham's performances against Liverpool, against United, and against Chelsea have all been really good. You could easily have got more out of those games than the 1 point they did. The Tottenham game as well, they played really well. 2 points in those 4 games, isn't it? So they've had a tough run of fixtures recently and have played well and are clearly on the up. Burnley, I think, could easily close that gap. Brighton, if they can actually score some goals, have been playing well enough to be better than they are. If there's a West Brom revival under Big Sam, I mean, Big Sam relegating Newcastle is... I know a lot of Newcastle fans just assume that's what's going to happen because it just feels it feels so pre-scripted. So I don't think that 7 point margin is... in 2 weeks, I could have gone.
Yeah, that's fair. I just feel like somehow Bruce will get himself out of it. I feel like he always gets a win when he needs to. Is there anything he can do, Jonathan, in terms... He'll say he hasn't got the players, which I'm not sure is strictly true. They have spent a fair amount of money, let's say. What can he do to get them set up and scoring and creating a little bit more?
I mean, Saint-Maximin is clearly a huge thing. I mean, if they got Saint-Maximin, they got Fraser, then they do have creativity there. Wilson is a decent forward if he can stay fit, but which is always a problem with him. But I mean, the 2 goals they've scored in those games, one was a penalty and one was a volley from Andy Carroll. Well, you can't be going around relying on Andy Carroll goals. I mean, they come around once every 9 years. So, I don't know. I mean, that's not a very good answer, but the squad clearly want to play with a back three. They are concerned by their lack of pace, and so I think that discussion that Bruce instinctively wants to play back four, the squad wants to play a back three. I mean, that, quite apart from anything else, it shows the lack of a sort of coherent plan from the top, the lack of intelligence in the recruitment. But I think fundamentally the players are right. They're not quick enough to play with a back four. And so they have to play with that back three. I think it's got to be pretty attritional and grim. And then you've got to hope that when Fraser's back from suspension, when Sam Maximum's back, and he's at least training again now, that the combination of those two plus Wilson / Carroll can get them enough. But at the minute, it's pretty hard to see any kind of sudden uplift.
Yeah, horrid memories of Andy Carroll scoring a hat-trick against Villa in 2010. Absolutely grim. Martin, Callum Wilson, it sounds like he had the choice between Villa and Newcastle, and when he joined Newcastle, he spoke about Newcastle being the brighter side, a team where he'd get more chances. It's fair to say Callum Wilson was wrong.
Yeah, well, any attacking player, obviously, listen, money plays a part. The talk is that he got a better pay packet from Newcastle, a longer contract offer. So that is the main. If those two things are true, then that's the main reason. I don't think you can really get around that. The lure of playing for Newcastle is fair, but in front of fans, pertinently, but it's the same at Villa, I'd say. But playing for Newcastle is I do think it's a big thing. They're not a massive club, but they do generate an excellent atmosphere. So I can see why people would want to do that. But why any attacking player would choose to, I think you have to consider the management in place. And unless he thought, Bruce will be gone soon enough, which maybe he did, but why would you go there? It always struck me as the same with attacking players going and playing under Tony Pulis. It's just like, you have to think about how this is going to impact your game and the sort of restrictions that are going to be put on you in terms of your freedom to go and play. So yeah, it looks like a strange decision now. I agree with Jonathan that they should. Well, I agree with the squad's thinking that they should be playing a back three. Personally, I think less knowing sort of what Newcastle should play, what they shouldn't play. Like Steve Bruce, always his idea of attacking football is throw as many strikers on the pitch as possible, and that's what he did against Arsenal. He plays Andy Carroll, Joe Linton, and Callum Wilson in the same side. I think he played Joe Linton on the wing, and Almiron on the other wing, who's also a very attacking player. But whenever Bruce was questioned, and whenever Villa or any team needed a goal, they'd just throw on all the strikers. No clear plan of actually how you're gonna get the ball to them, like where the vision's coming from, where the creativity's coming from, and that's what you saw against Arsenal. It's just like we'll just put three strikers on, not play three up front, but we'll put as many strikers on as possible. And it sort of rankled with me that obviously he's an ex-teammate and friend, but Gary Neville actually said, if they keep playing 3 or 4 strikers, they will score goals. It's just like, come on, Gary, come on, you're better than that. There's no logic to it. Have a think about how you're actually going to play the game. How are you going to create the chances? That's the key. And I accept. I wouldn't want the Newcastle job with the squad that they have. It's a thankless task trying to get much creativity from them without St. Maximin. But yeah, I just think Steve Bruce has proven time and time again that he doesn't have the tactical nous to get a team scoring goals.
I should say, to be fair to him, his time at Sunderland were going, I think they were in the top 6 or top 7, and then he sold Darren Bent for 24 million, which is Bent wanted to leave. 24 million was a fair price, and then suddenly Asamoah Gyan decided he was off for next week because he'd had a huge offer from the Middle East, wherever it was. And so suddenly he's left without any strikers. And Sunderland's next, I think they beat somebody, maybe Fulham, maybe Villa, actually. One of those mid-table teams I can't quite distinguish in my head. They beat them, I think, 2-1 away, and the next 7 games were the top 6 of the previous season plus Stoke away, and Sunderland took 1 point from those 7 games and were a downward spiral they couldn't get out of. So he was, to an extent, a bit unfortunate at Sunderland. And that when Sunderland had Bent and Jan as the 2 centre forwards and Danny Welbeck coming off the left, they were really, really good to watch. And Nedum Manua getting forward from right back. You might remember them beating Chelsea 3-0 at Stamford Bridge.
I do. I was thinking of that game.
One of the great Sunderland performances. I think was bent out for that game, I think, and it was Welbeck and Jan up front. But anyway, do we want to talk about Sunderland games from 10 years ago? I know I do, but
I can see I can feel the viewership almost dwindling away from us as we talk about Sunderland and Villa through this podcast. Let's move on. Steve Bruce has had enough now, I think. Let's move on to United v Liverpool take 2 in the FA Cup, the one game that WhoScored are previewing in their podcast this week, thanks to Martin Laurence. What did we learn from the game at the weekend, Jonathan? It wasn't even a cage affair. I don't actually know what I make of it, so I'm hoping that you made something of it.
No, I don't really know what you make of it or what I make of it. It was a very odd game. The first 30 minutes and the last hour were totally different. The first 30 minutes, Liverpool just looked a sharper, smarter, better side. Thiago controlled the game. I thought Shaqiri played really well in that early period. And then after, so midway through the first half an hour gone, United started to impose themselves, and Liverpool, you could almost see the fear, and they dropped deeper and deeper. By their standards, I mean, they weren't right on the edge of the box, but it wasn't that usual very, very high press, which I think is explained by having your two best midfielders playing at centre back. So Liverpool don't have that dynamism, that interconnectedness, that cohesiveness that brought them the title last year, and that I think is why. As much as dips in individual form, I think that's why they've suddenly stopped scoring. That no goals in the last 3 games, 1 goal in the last 4 games, and I was thinking there's a sort of a paradox here that football increasingly has become about philosophies, and the leagues tend to be won by teams with a philosopher manager. So since Ferguson retired in 2013, apart from Leicester, every league champion has had a philosophy manager. But I wonder if, when the circumstances are as strange as they are now, whether that is actually a disadvantage, that it's harder to adapt to the new circumstances if you've got this very, very precise pattern of play, and that maybe isn't quite applicable to these circumstances. Whereas if your game plan is based more around individuals and about moments, as Solskjaer's United are, as, to be honest, United have been throughout history, they've always been the team of great individuals rather than a great sort of structure of play. So if you look back even at Busby's teams in the 60s, there's a lot of, that period between Munich and when they started winning things again. They won the Cup in 63, that 5-year period. There's a lot of talk, so 61, 62, when Noel Cantwell goes there from West Ham, sort of saying, well, what's the plan? And Busby came from an age when you didn't have to have a plan, but the early 60s is when you had people like Harry Potts at Burnley and Nicholson at Tottenham and Shankly at Liverpool and Revie at Leeds, who had very sort of coherent notions of how they wanted teams to play. And United never really had that. And it didn't matter because they had Best and they had Law and they had Charlton. They had 3 of the greatest players on the planet. And that brings them 2 league titles in the European Cup. But as soon as Busby goes, and as soon as Law gets an injury and Charlton starts to age and Best has all, the demons start to overwhelm him, United fizzle away and they get relegated in 74. They don't win another trophy till 77, don't win the league until 93. So they've always been a team of individuals. But I wonder if, in the present circumstances, that is not almost an advantageous thing to be, even though that goes against the trend of tactical thought over the last decade or so.
I mean, maybe that's where Steve Bruce has got it from, not having a plan. Obviously, he was at Man Utd for a long time. Maybe that's where he's taken his.
It's not so much not having.
I know
what
you mean. No, I know what you mean.
It's you look at Barcelona and it's about system. It's about playing a particular way. You look at Real Madrid, and it's unstructured, but it's not about cohesive intermovements. It's about creating the platform so that individual geniuses can produce their great moments. And I think, United's history is bizarre. That they're the most successful team in English league history with 20 league titles, but they've come under 3 managers. So even before Guardiola, Manchester City had won the league under more different managers than United, which is ridiculous. So United require these great leaders who somehow inspire players to be that little bit greater. Rather than relying on, whereas Liverpool are the exact opposite. In the boot room philosophy for 30 years made them the most successful team in England. And okay, that philosophy adapts and it changes as different players come in, as different managers take in their own direction, as the game itself changes. But there was a sort of a basis to that. And that sort of breaks up early 90s, partly because maybe Souness wasn't the right man for it, partly because I think Hillsborough had a huge psychological impact, but also because the nature of football changes, partly with satellite TV in the Premier League and partly with the abolition of the back pass. That the way that Liverpool had played, keeping possession with the back pass, has gone, and it's harder for them to adapt to the new environment. But a team has a looser approach to the game. And the circumstances we're in now are the most disrupted circumstances we've seen since the early 90s, probably more disruptive than that. And again, it appears that certainly compared to how they were last season, it's the less structured team, or the team is less reliant on philosophy, that has been able to adapt better.
Yeah, Manchester United in my time as a football fan have always been more about mentality. I think you're absolutely right there. And they had the two best chances, Martin. I think Liverpool had the better of the game, but the two big chances fell to United, didn't they?
They did, yeah. It was an odd game, like you say. I think we didn't really learn anything other than you can't learn what you already know. And that was that Liverpool aren't as coherent as they have been, not even close, to be fair. There's even with Thiago coming in, who sort of, I said in last week's show, would inject that vertical pass, and he does, and he did play well. There's just an issue with the front three all being off form at the same time. And it's not just them, but when you've got your three best and most important players and none of them are firing, there's gonna be problems, and that's not really happened to now. So yeah, they lack cohesion, and Manchester United probably lack a little bit of courage in these games to actually press a little bit higher up the pitch. They sat in for most of the game, and obviously, like you say, they did have good chances on the break. But some of the stats from it, like their ability to keep the ball was awful. I think Rashford, Pogba, and Fernandes, their pass accuracy, sort of all three of them, was about 60%. Just didn't keep the ball high up the pitch, and obviously they played on the counter, and that's how they like to play. And they could have nicked it, like you said. But at the same time, just that lack of sort of courage to go and impose themselves on a game where they wouldn't have a better chance to beat Liverpool. Liverpool didn't play particularly well. Their strikers are not scoring goals, and they're playing two midfielders at centre back, and still that didn't bring Manchester United out. So I wouldn't be too happy watching it as a Man United fan. But at the same time, excellent. You'd look at it and say, really good point.
I mean, my concern with them, and I thought this with the Fulham game last night, they're just about shading games.
Yeah.
But the opposition always seems to have a chance. Always, it's not that they're having 25 chances in opposition 5. It's the last 5 games. I know I mentioned this last week, but the Fulham and Liverpool games just add to it. So Wolves 11 shots to 9, Villa 19 shots to 15, Burnley 17 to 11, Liverpool 8 to 17, Fulham 15 to 12. Those are all. I mean, the Liverpool game is significantly Liverpool's favour. Now, okay, not all shots are equal, but the others, they're all games where you think, well, a draw is probably a fair result. United have edged it. I'm not sure you can keep doing that. You can't keep relying on Pogba or Cavani doing something brilliant, or Bruno Fernandes doing something brilliant. And it is still very based on these individuals having great moments, and going behind yet again in an away game. Again, that it shows a lot about the side they're able to come back, but I don't think that's the way you can consistently keep playing. I
think the one thing probably that we did learn from the United-Liverpool game was more about personnel, more about sort of Solskjaer. And he does rotate his team, and we talked about that last week, and that's not a bad thing. But the fact that Bailly didn't start that game when everyone was saying, oh, this partnership's, that's it, they're set. The fact that Lindelof came in was a real surprise. So maybe throws a little bit of doubt into sort of Solskjaer's level of trust of Bailly in those sort of big occasion games. And also a note for Luke Shaw, who was excellent, has come under competition from Alex Telles, obviously, and that was referenced in the game as to whether that's improved his form. So I looked into it based on our ratings at least, and obviously, like the eye test would say it has, but statistically it certainly has as well. His rating since the start of last season up until Telles arrived was 6.79, and since he arrived it's 7.06, which is quite a significant increase in terms of our ratings at least. So he's playing really well, and that bodes really well for England, I think, because the big discussion for England is that we've only got Ben Chilwell at left back, and I don't think we do now. I think Luke Shaw's looking back to his best, and obviously gets a lot of stick. more for his sort of physical condition, but he's still got pace. He's still very, obviously always been really strong. And he's just looking a little bit more solid now. Still makes some rash tackles and decisions, I think, but his form has improved, I'd say, quite dramatically since Telles arrived, and proves what a bit of added competition can do for a player.
Yeah, I think after Fernandes, I think many Manchester United fans would say he's up there as their player of the season. Jonathan, how seriously are these teams going to take the FA Cup? I mean, we saw that Liverpool played a very strong side against Villa's under 15, so you'd imagine they'd go quite strong this weekend against United.
Yeah, I mean, I find it really hard to tell. I mean, Liverpool actually haven't played many games recently. They seem to have had a lot of. I mean, I know they've got the game against Burnley tonight. But their schedule this last 2 weeks has not been as intense as it has been for some sides, and I think there is a feeling with Liverpool that the players need to be in a rhythm. Now, getting the balance right is obviously hugely difficult. I sort of think if Minamino doesn't play, when is he ever going to play? And I think equally, probably one of those young centre backs has to come in, be that Williams, be that Phillips, that at some point you have to give these players a chance. And Klopp previously has never taken the cup very seriously, so this would seem a time to do it. United, I think it's a bit more complicated because they're suddenly in a position where they could mount a serious challenge for the league. And yet I also sort of feel that Solskjaer could do with winning a trophy, that would give a reign that still isn't entirely taken seriously. That would give it credibility. And obviously, if as a Manchester United manager you can beat Liverpool, that is an enormously positive thing. In the same way that when Klopp beat United in the Europa League in his first season, that was a huge thing, and sort of giving him credibility. He's won the league with Dortmund. He's obviously has credibility, but in sort of suggesting, yes, this is something that can work here. So I really don't know how seriously United will take it. You would think Cavani would probably start, given he seems not to start every league game. I know he started against Fulham. And maybe given that Rashford, although even Rashford's performance on Sunday, I can't quite work it out in my head, because I know he got caught offside 4 times in the first half and he looked over-eager making those runs. But at the same time, I think it was the threat of those runs were one of the factors in forcing Liverpool to drop a bit deeper. So I know he got a lot of flack for that performance, and it clearly wasn't a great performance. But I did sort of think it was quite a significant performance. So, I mean, Solskjaer, you played people like Dan James last time, and I can see Dan James against Liverpool, against fullbacks to push high, working well. So that's another chance to give him minutes. So I would expect, what am I waffling on to here? Both teams would probably be slightly changed, but not dramatically.
Yeah, be nice to see Van der Beek play some football.
Yeah, I forgot about him. Yeah,
easily done.
Yeah,
I think both teams will take it relatively seriously, just based on the fact that their record in the FA Cup needs a bit of a boost. To be honest, I look at over the last 20 years since the turn of the millennium, they've both only won it twice. I mean, consider these are probably the 2 biggest teams in the country, really, in terms of historically at least. To have only won the FA Cup twice in that time. Liverpool's record, obviously, haven't taken it that seriously under Klopp, but maybe the fact that they look under threat in the league now, having been so dominant last season, if they weren't to win anything this season, that would be seen as a bit of it would be seen as a failure, obviously, to drop off from that level. So this is a chance for them not only to win silverware, but for Jurgen Klopp to actually make some progress in a competition that he hasn't. His record's 15 games, 6 wins, 4 draws, 5 defeats. Never made it past the 5th round, which was last season. So they've never got to the quarterfinals under Jurgen Klopp. And Liverpool haven't won the FA Cup for 15 years, since certainly in my lifetime anyway, I would say was the best FA Cup final I can remember, the 3-3 against West Ham.
God, you're so young.
To be fair, I'm not 15 years old. That's not the first FA Cup final I saw. But yeah, that game was incredible. Certainly one that sticks in the mind for me.
It's definitely the best one I've covered. That's definitely true.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'd still go Coventry Spurs in '87, but
2 years before I was born. So.
Yeah. And equally, the United Palace in '90 was great, but I guess you were 1 then.
One.
Yeah.
I remember it well. Great game.
I can't help you with either of them. Either I was born in '85, so not much knowledge of those cup finals. Talking of knowledge, I think you've got some trivia for us, Martin.
Yeah, I think it's certainly a gettable one. Obviously, they all have been recently. Jonathan's running away with it, which is a bit of a concern. But yeah, I think you should remember. It's which former Liverpool player thought he'd scored the winner in the FA Cup final in 2006 before Gerrard equalised in injury time.
God.
Okay.
Do you know
Yeah. Yes, I do.
Do you know it? Do you know it? Might as well do it now.
He missed a penalty in the shootout as well.
I mean, it would have been one of the most ridiculous winning goals of all time. Paul Konchesky with a terrible cross on the left that floated in.
Yeah. Well done.
There you go.
Not hard
He's done
enough.
you again.
Yeah, not hard enough. We go again next week.
You really need to up your game with these questions, Martin. I mean, we've talked about team selections and whether people will take the cup seriously. Something we took very seriously a few episodes ago was our team of the season so far, and the Who Scored public on Twitter have had a go themselves, and they've done their vote, and they've come up with their team of the season. So I'll just run through it quickly. We've got Emi Martinez in goal, Cancelo, Fofana, Zuma, and Chilwell as the back four. Souček and Gundogan sitting, Fernandes just in front of them, Saka on the right, Son on the left, Harry Kane up front. Jonathan, obviously you had a bad time when the general public looked at your team on social media. This is your chance to retort.
Unlike some people, I don't need approbation from others.
I don't know what you're on about.
Well, I mean, okay, the most striking thing about that is Zuma, who I don't disagree with. I think he's had a good season. Why is he not playing? Why is Lampard suddenly jettisoned him? So that links in with what I was saying right at the start. I mean, I guess Souček at the back of midfield is. It's somebody who obviously can play their energy run. Somebody who sits, which is fine. Wouldn't be what I'd choose, but I understand that. And with the support of Gundogan alongside him, I think Gundogan certainly for the last sort of month, 6 weeks has been excellent. I think he looks back to the sort of form before he had that horrific injury, and I think he's been one of the key reasons in City's upturn. That I don't really know what you call that position. The sort of because he's not sitting, but he's not really. He's clearly behind, he's clearly deeper than De Bruyne. So it's sort of like a repressed 8 or something, but he does it superbly well. I mean, no De Bruyne, but I guess it's very difficult to get De Bruyne and Fernandes in. So I mean, we had that problem as well, didn't we? Trying to fit both of them in.
Hard.
The front three. I mean, I think Son and Kane kind of have to be there. Then so you choose on the right. Well, again, certainly since Christmas, Saka's been absolutely brilliant. So yeah, no, it's a. I mean, my team would beat that team, obviously, but I think it would be a contest. It would be a game worth watching.
Yeah, I feel like it's fairly different to my lineup. Some of the defence is very similar. I mean, the most picked person there, Martin, who got the highest percentage of vote, is Emi Martinez in goal. So obviously it's all subjective. People have got different opinions on the game, but yeah, he's the most picked.
Yeah, I don't think that's too surprising. I don't think there's really. Obviously, Darlow was in Jonathan's team, and in the Who Scored team has now dropped out, and it is Martinez after the sort of last couple of games.
Well, I mean, last night Martinez was sensational.
Yeah, and I think he's just been consistent throughout the season, so I'm not that surprised. And he's a popular character as well. And you've got Arsenal fans who'll vote for him. Probably more than Villa fans. He wins the Budweiser King of the Match for Villa when he doesn't make a save, and it's just Arsenal fans that vote for him. They love Emi Martinez. They love a vote. So fair enough. And I think obviously that plays into Saka getting in the team, and there's I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it. He's been excellent recently, but like Jonathan says, it's probably a little bit of recency bias in terms of his inclusion, and maybe Gundogan, which I thought was probably the most interesting one, just because he's a player, certainly at City at least, who sort of gets overlooked, doesn't get a great deal of credit. So the fact that he won that poll up against Tielemans and Mount, he was in that poll. He beat Tielemans by 1% for what it's worth. So very, very tight. Fernandes beat De Bruyne by 4%, got 43%, De Bruyne 39%. So again, very tight. Grealish 13% down on Heung-min Son. I don't know what people are thinking there. That's ridiculous. But yeah, there were some tight ones and some not so tight. And obviously Martinez was the one that wasn't so tight. But yeah, an interesting team. I think there's a decent balance to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, Gundogan was a surprise one for me. But like you say, he's been outstanding for the last sort of 6 weeks or so.
I mean, we won't have a bad word said about Gundogan, to be fair, because he's done very well for my fantasy football team in the double game week. I got him in. Unfortunately, obviously, he scored a penalty against Villa, but he served me very well. And as Martin says, Jonathan, nice balance to the side, which we do like to see.
Yeah, these teams. There's literally nothing worse. I mean, clearly there are, but literally nothing worse than when you have these best 11s. There's just a list of 11 good players.
Yeah.
But this is a team that would work together. And so well done, the public. I salute them.
Yeah, I saw a team the other day on something. I can't remember what it was. It wasn't WhoScored, and De Bruyne was the anchor man in front of the defence just to squeeze people in. You can't be doing that. Let's move on now to our midway point prediction. So obviously most teams are at 19 games, and so we're at the halfway point. So the three of us are going to choose our title winner, the top four, fifth and sixth, the relegation 3, and who we think top scorer is going to be. Martin, I'll come to you first for the title winner.
Yeah, and I think this is another one where sort of not recency bias, but just form comes into it. And I think most people have Man City as the favourites now, quite relatively clear favourites, if anything, even though they're not even top of the league as things stand. Just their form at both ends of the pitch, less so last night in terms of attacking because it just wouldn't go in for them for a long part of the game, but defensively still excellent with Diaz and Stones there. So they just look the best set, undoubtedly. Obviously, Manchester United still on this great unbeaten run. But the way that City are playing, I think it's really, really difficult to look past them now.
Jonathan, who have you gone for?
Yeah, City. I mean, I sort of felt really almost since the season began that a team would suddenly win 6-7 games in a row, and that would be enough to propel them to the title. I thought Liverpool were the more likely, but it turns out that it appears now it's going to be City. That the defense is looking as solid as it's ever looked under Guardiola, and they just look much better structured. Although that Villa game ends up being decided by a controversial goal and a penalty, it could have been 3 or 4-0, and it wouldn't have been unrepresentative of the game. So they're playing with that real rhythm again. So, I mean, I guess if De Bruyne got injured or something like that, then maybe that could derail them. But it's almost getting to that point again where it's difficult to see where they drop points. I mean, I think their fixtures are pretty straightforward coming up, and then they've got Liverpool and Tottenham back to back. So I guess those two games, which are I think the middle of February, I think that's probably where the crunch of the season is going to come.
Yeah, I mean, you both plumped for City. I've gone for Liverpool. I'm not really sure why. Looking at it and listening to you two, but I just think they will click at some point. I don't think they can be as bad as they've been in the last few weeks. They're not going to continue with their not scoring the way they are in front of goal. So I just think eventually they will click and go on a run. And it just seems a lot of the time that not having any centre backs doesn't seem to matter to them too much. So I've gone with them, but obviously I can see why you two have gone for Man City because they're looking very, very strong at the moment. Jonathan, who's your 2, 3, and 4?
Liverpool, United, and Leicester.
You've got Leicester in there.
Yeah, I mean, I know this is a change from a week ago based on 2 games, but it is possible I was wrong a week ago. No, I mean, look, to be fair to me, which I always like to be, they were 3 points ahead of Southampton at the time, and I was wondering whether Europe may derail them. And that still is a potential issue, but they were so impressive against Chelsea, particularly that I think you've got to think that they'll have enough to certainly to outlast Chelsea. Spurs maybe could pip them. Liverpool. I don't disagree with anything you just said about them. I think at some point they will click. But also, I don't think we can be sure that they've had their injury crisis. Yeah, just because you've had one injury crisis doesn't mean you won't get another one. And I suspect it's in the next sort of month, 6 weeks, that teams are really going to feel the pressure of injuries. And so Liverpool could lose 2 or 3 more. And that wouldn't be sort of terrible, freakish, outrageous luck. I think that is just the nature of this season. So it is possible they suddenly find their squad being absolutely hammered. It's also possible they do find a cheap centre-back from somewhere, and that gives them a boost, and the front three start playing again, and they do start to reproduce the form they showed against Palace, which was only 5 games ago. So Liverpool, I sort of feel there's a they could win the title, they could finish 5th. There's a big sort of potential fluctuation, but fundamentally they and City the best 2 sides, so I'd assume they're second. United, we've talked about. I'm not entirely convinced by them, but I think they've got enough quality in the squad that they will stay up there. And Leicester, maybe I've been underestimating just how strong their squad is. The fact they've got all the fullbacks in the world, they've got 3 really good centre backs, and they've got that partnership of Ndidi and Tielemans at the back in midfield looks really good. But they've got Mendy who can come in as well. They've got Dennis Pratt who to come in. So possibly I was underestimating Leicester a week or 2 ago, but they were so good against Chelsea. I think it's you've got to assume they'll finish above them this season.
Yeah, I mean, Vardy isn't even firing at the moment, and then they're still going really well. Fair play to Leicester. I said it either the last podcast or the podcast before. I'm really impressed by what they're doing, especially off the back of what happened last season. Martin, who's your 2, 3, and 4?
Copy paste, I'm afraid.
Exactly as that.
Yeah, I just think obviously the main talking point is Leicester, and I completely agree. And I said it last week. I think their squad depth is pretty outstanding, really, and hasn't really been showcased because they've had, obviously, your squad depth is shown when you have injuries. But at the same time, people have sort of maybe overlooked the fact that they've got all these players coming back. Great age to the squad, obviously not that relevant to this season. But yeah, they've basically got 3 right backs who are very good at playing left back. That looked like being an issue ahead of the season. It looked like they hadn't really replaced Chilwell. Obviously, they signed Castagna, but natural sort of right-sided player. But even when Pereira comes back, he can play left back. And obviously, we're used to teams being able to sort of switch their wingers, and Leicester can switch their fullbacks.
It's mad.
Win, basically. Pereira played left back for almost an entire season, I think, when he was at Nice. So you could see him come in there. And I just think the balance of that midfield, I was watching the game against Chelsea, and I was just thinking, is there a better balance? I don't know. Maybe it's one for Jonathan with his sort of love of a balanced midfield. Is there a better balanced midfield than Ndidi, Tielemans, and Maddison? Just in the league, I just think they work so well together. There's a bit of everything in there. Maybe there is. Maybe I'm overreacting, but in terms of, I just don't think there's any weakness in that area of the pitch. And they're all just playing for Rodgers, and I think they'll get 4th and possibly even 3rd. I think they'll stay there.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think the midfield is great. I guess the only one that's really up there with it at the moment is City. When you have De Bruyne, Gundogan, and then personally, I'd still prefer Fernandinho, but obviously Rodri's playing at the moment. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that Leicester midfield is a midfield 3. They each seem to fulfill those roles absolutely perfectly, and they fit very well together.
Yeah, and they've had problems when Ndidi's been out in the past. Is the only thing when he's picked up injuries. I think they've struggled. He's very, very important for them. I haven't put them in my top 4. I've gone City, United, and Spurs. I can't see Spurs with Son and Kane and Mourinho not getting in the top 4. So I've plumped for them. That's the reason why. I love Jose Mourinho, so that's why I've gone for it. 5th and 6th for you, Martin.
5th and 6th. So yeah, Tottenham 5th. And obviously they could get top 4. Of course they could, with that personnel that you just mentioned. So I think Tottenham 5th, when you haven't got them in the top 4, is pretty obvious. 6th is the one, and obviously Chelsea are probably the favourites to sort of dig their way out and get a European spot. If they didn't, it would be sort of scandalous, really. But I've gone for Everton. I'm not entirely convinced by my own decision. But yeah, I've gone for Everton just based on the fact that, similarly to Leicester, they've adapted really, really well to quite a few injuries, particularly at the back, and then they're now sort of deploying this Tony Pulis West Brom back four of centre backs, and it's working lovely. Like we've not heard mention of Jordan Pickford in about 2 months, apart from me just there. And I think he's really benefited from having like this really solid base to work from. And obviously the start of the season was all about James Rodriguez. He's sort of gone off the boil completely, but they're still picking up results. And one thing I looked at, and I know at this point everyone's played roughly 19 games, so everyone's still got all of the teams to play. Everyone's playing the same teams, but I think momentum really counts. And I just looked at their fixture list, and they don't really have a spell of really tough games. I think if you lose like three games in a row or don't win for 5 games, then you're basically derailed in such a tight sort of season. But if you look at their fixtures, there's no sort of back-to-back difficult games. So I just see them picking up wins like constantly. Chelsea are obviously the other one. I did have a look at Villa, but I just think they'll be too short. And I think conversely to Everton, Villa have a really, really tough run at the end of the season. I think they've got 5 of sort of the big teams in their last 8 games, I think. So that could sort of derail any chance that they'd need to have a good points haul by that point. So yeah, I just looked into the fixtures and I just thought, yeah, I'm going to base it based on that and the fact that Everton, I just think they'll steadily pick up points just as they have throughout the first half of the season. So yeah, gone for them.
Interesting. Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, I think 6th is the big question. And you sort of think now that if Chelsea have less chance of finishing 6th if Lampard stays on. Now, as I understand it, the feeling at the moment of the club is that they don't want to appoint an interim. There seems to be a suggestion that they want a German or German-speaking or German-adjacent or German-experienced manager to come in to get the best out of Havertz and Werner and to produce that sort of German style of football, which seems to be preeminent at the moment. So I think Nagelsmann's definitely a target, and I would assume that Nagelsmann would be open to stepping up from Leipzig. Tuchel obviously is available at the moment. Hasenhüttl, I think, is a possibility leaving Southampton. But if things really do continue to decline as they appear to be at the minute at Chelsea, and 5 defeats in the last 8 is appalling, then maybe somebody has to be brought in on an interim basis, and maybe that does give them a bit of a boost. I think that Champions League fixture against Atletico, which I think the first leg is the 23rd of February, I think that's a key date as well, that if things go really badly in the next, say, 3 weeks, it may be that they bring in somebody and try and have a crack at the Champions League, just as under Villas-Boas, he went between the 2 legs for that last 16 game against Napoli, and Di Matteo came in 2012. So Chelsea's squad, of course, they should be top 6. But I think really the manager is the issue there. And then if it's not them, then I guess Everton probably are the most realistic of the other candidates, which I think you'd probably say are Villa and Southampton. I still think Southampton have got, although they've slightly tailed away the last couple of weeks, I still think they do have a chance of that. But just on squad depth and on the assumption that something will change, I've gone Chelsea 6th.
Very good. I've gone Chelsea 6th as well. Leicester 5th. Obviously, we've all waxed lyrical about Leicester on this podcast. I just think Chelsea not finishing in the top 6 would be an absolute scandal. So surely that they've got to. Relegation 3 for you, Jonathan?
Yeah, I found this really hard. I mean, let's start with the easy one, Sheffield United, who I don't think have actually been that bad this season. I don't think the new signings have particularly worked. I think they maybe slightly disrupted a model that was working well. A couple of key injuries have clearly hurt. I think they had a bit of bad luck early on, and then they just keep losing games by a single goal. They seem to have lost belief, and they're so far adrift now that I think it's, even if they do have an upturn, it's going to be very hard for them to get back into it. So Sheffield United, which is obvious, and then I still sort of believe that West Brom will improve under Allardyce. I know it's been. There hasn't been much sign of that so far. But this is what happened with Allardyce at Sunderland. The start was pretty poor. I mean, Sunderland, I think, lost 6-2 away at Everton. But when he got in 4 players in January and he started to impose his structure, things really did improve by the April. So I think if you're a West Brom fan, I wouldn't start to panic, really, until Easter's when it needs to start to turn around. Fulham are playing really, really well at the moment. Burnley, you always think can get something, but I mean, when I emailed these over, I said the bottom three at the minute. I said Sheffield United, West Brom, and Fulham. But then, having seen Fulham last night, maybe I'm underestimating them. Maybe I should put Burnley in there. Brighton have clearly got problems scoring goals, but I think they're playing pretty well. Newcastle, we talked about earlier, I think they could easily get sucked into it. I think it's not impossible. Leeds get sucked into it just because when the wheels fall off the Bielsa team, they tend to take the axle and everything else with them. But I said Sheffield United, West Brom, and Fulham. I think I'm now going to change that to Sheffield United, West Brom, and Burnley.
Brave. I'd say that's brave. Burnley, I just always seem to think that Dyche will get them up the table and they'll end up having a relatively comfortable season. I've gone Brighton, West Brom, and Sheffield United. I just think Brighton seem to find a way to lose games despite playing really well. So that's why I've put them in there. And like I said last week, I rate Fulham. I think they'll get out of it. I think what Scott Parker's done there has been really, really impressive recently. Martin, what's your three?
Yeah, so Sheffield United, obviously. West Brom, personally, I also think it's relatively obvious. I don't really see it for them personally. Maybe I'm wrong, but I guess the other one, the main one that's of interest, I think we've all sort of plumped for Fulham to stay up just because they're a really likable team at the moment as well. That's important to say. I think that affects people's sort of judgment. Maybe it's worth saying they've played really tough games, obviously, but they are on the longest run without a win, and that's the concern. Like, even though they're improving massively, 8 games without a win now. They've drawn a lot of them, 5 or 6 of them, and they've played really tough games. But that lack of a goal scorer, obviously they've got Mitrovic there. I really don't know what the problem is with Mitrovic. They're playing really well without him, so maybe that's justification. But he is there. He's the goal scorer in the squad, and he can't get a game when they can't win matches. Obviously came on against Man United, and I thought he had an impact. He's just someone to worry about in the box, especially when games are tight. So their lack of a striker concerns me, or a striker that sort of Parker wants to play. I think they might need to get one in this month. I'm not sure if they will, but yeah, if they got a goal scorer who could get them even just sort of 6 or 7 goals by the end of the season, I think they'll stay up. And that could be Mitrovic if he comes back in. So I've gone for them to stay up, and I've gone for Newcastle. So we've all gone for a different one for that last spot. I've gone for Newcastle just based on what Jonathan said earlier. They're only 7 points clear, and I think the situation with Ashley, where he is unlikely to get rid of Bruce, perhaps unlikely to get rid of Bruce particularly soon, unless things continue to go as they have, which they may well do. I think they'll just take a little bit too long to get rid of him, personally. And I think the way it's going, it just looks really bleak. I don't see their squad is poor. It's really poor. It's really poor. I just see, obviously, there's a lot more life in Fulham at the moment, and I agree with Dan that Burnley, I write them off all the time, and they just go on a run of like three or four sort of good results, and it's just like, where did that come from? But it always happens. So there's not a lot of logic behind it, but I just think that always happens. And yeah, Brighton, good. You can make a good point, Dan. They don't win games that they should, which is a concern as well. But I think they're good enough. I've gone for Newcastle as the last one.
We'll stay with you for your top scorer, Martin.
Just based on the fact that Salah, I would usually go Salah, but obviously he's out of form at the moment. You don't know how long that will last. So it's difficult to look beyond Harry Kane, I think, at the moment, just because he doesn't go through spells where he doesn't score, really. I can't remember a spell where he's gone 4 or 5 games without scoring.
Well, he does. Yeah. It's always in August, but August over.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's fair. He tends to, when he comes back from his annual injury, he tends to end the season really, really well. So yeah, I think it's difficult to look beyond him, really.
That's why I haven't picked Kane, because I always think he does tend to pick up an injury. So I've just gone Salah because he's top scorer at the moment, and I think when he does go on a run of scoring goals, he scores goals. So I've gone for Liverpool to win the league. So for them to do that, he's going to have to start firing again. So I've stuck with Salah, who's up there at the moment. Jonathan, who's yours?
Yeah, I mean, Kane and Salah were the two options. I think you want a penalty taker.
Yeah.
The doubt, Kane, does he stay fit? Salah, to what extent is this little dip in form? How long is that going to go on for? They're the doubts. But I went for Kane just because I think the way Tottenham play, everything goes through Kane and Son. So it's not that Kane's going to suddenly play 6 games in a row where he plays really well and doesn't get a goal, which could happen for Salah, and wouldn't be him playing badly. It's just they play a different type of football. So that's why I went for Kane, which is not particularly exciting or interesting, but I think it's right.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. The proof will be in the pudding. I mean, usually at this point we'd look at the long shots now, which we can't really do because there's only one Premier League game. I mean, I guess Newcastle beating Villa would probably be a long shot. Are either of you going to clump for
that? No. I mean, Luton against Chelsea takes on a great significance. Perhaps we wouldn't have been looking forward to that game quite as much, but yeah, that could be tricky. Yeah, I remember in Mourinho's last full season of his first spell, Chelsea played against Wickham in the semi-final of the League Cup, and I think did they draw at Adams Park, or maybe they lost by a single goal. And Mourinho had one of these selections where I think he picked Michael Essien at centre back to make a point that he desperately needed Tal Ben Haim. And I just remember one of the iconic moments of Mourinho's collapse was in this tiny little room off the tunnel at Adams Park, and it was a freezing cold, damp night. You know when you get that sort of damp fog at January matches or February matches, and there was a big tea urn in the room, just belching out steam, and it was really warm in there, and it's freezing cold outside. So it's just the walls was dripping with condensation. Couldn't see a thing out of my glasses, and Mourinho giving this incredibly truculent, angry. I mean, it's not even a press conference because it's just sort of like a dozen journalists kind of packed in this tiny room, sticking a dictaphone over, and him sort of insisting Tal Ben Haim was the only thing that could save Chelsea now. And that was the moment he thought, this is gone. This isn't going to last.
And we all know what happened.
Chelsea's an interesting one. I think if you look at their results in the cup competition so far, obviously they've absolutely blitzed. Was it Barnsley and Morecambe? And I think that sort of points to the sort of fragile mentality of the squad more than anything. The fact that they are so clearly an excellent group of players, and when the pressure of the league is off them, they can show it, and they've played excellently. So personally, I think they'll probably have a good cup run while they get these sort of favourable fixtures. With all due respect to Luton, maybe I'm wrong. So I think the pressure will be off them in a sense, and they'll probably win that quite comfortably. Personally, it's just that, like I say, that sort of highlights maybe the sort of weakness in their mentality, that the pressure really does get to them when it matters.
Yeah, I'm going to go. My long shot will be that Martin sends me the script next week. That never ever happens. So it'd be nice to get the script next week. Martin, that does us for the podcast Edge of the Box this week. Thanks ever so much for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe to us as well, however you take in your podcasts. And if you are watching on YouTube, give the video a like and a comment as well with whether you agree with what you've seen or heard in this podcast. Again, thanks ever so much for listening and watching. See you next week.